Good morning, everyone. It's weird to be up here. I'm glad we moved inside because today's weather was not cooperative, but it's sunshine in here, so thank you all for being here. I am really super excited to have an opportunity. This has been a long time coming for the city. So I'll get started by saying who I am. I'm Deborah Bowie. I'm one of the assistant city managers, and I have been working with this initiative for goodness. I have COVID brain, more than a year. There are a couple of things that are really significant about today, and I'll start with the most obvious one. Today is National Immigrants Day. 135 years ago, the French gifted the Statue of Liberty to the United States on an island called Bedloe, which we now refer to as Liberty Island. So that is a significant day. It's about the founding, right, the foundational structure of our country. Most, all of us come from immigrants. So that, for us, was an important reason to plug into today. But the real reason you're here is because we are excited to share with you a report that the city received through a grant. So you're going to hear more about the report. I will not steal her thunder. But I want to just, if I could, in the welcome, explain to you what this work has been like. Gainesville is a really interesting community. It is a welcoming community because we have so many different people and cultures here, largely because of the university. It's a university town, and we're proud of that. But what we realized more than a year ago is that we have a lot of work to do as a city in making sure that our actions match our words. And to do that, that means how can we come up with policy recommendations to our commission so that we are really treating immigrants and refugees as partners, neighbors, friends in our community. To do that requires a lot of work. So we applied for and we received a grant through Welcoming America and New American Economy, and the grant really is in two pieces. The first piece is a research grant that tells us who the people are behind the numbers. And the second grant was a technical assistance grant that helps us capacity build. So that's what we've been doing for a better part of a year. Before COVID, so it's been really challenging to do this work. There are so many wonderful people in this room who are passionate and committed, and we thank you, because at the end of this journey, we will have a report to give recommendations to our city leadership to say, here are areas where the city can codify how to welcome and include immigrants and refugees. And that's in Park and Rec, Cultural Affairs, obviously dealing with law enforcement, Public Works. Just think about every aspect that you engage with the city and what that looks like for people where English may not be their first language. So we call this initiative the Gainesville Immigrant Neighbor Inclusion, or GINI. You're going to hear us refer to GINI many times. Part of this work means, well, the journey has been really interesting because it's given us an opportunity to really hear from people in our community about their shared experiences. A lot of those stories are great, but I must tell you, a lot of them are pretty challenging. I don't know that sometimes we have a general awareness of what other people are dealing with. And this pandemic, the last 18 months, has been extremely difficult for a lot of people. One of the lessons I think that came out of the pandemic for us in doing this work, and this will be no surprise, is that the pandemic uncovered inequities that really already existed in Black and brown communities, particularly, and most especially if you are an immigrant. Think about the last 18 months and how you would have received information on where to go for a COVID shot, or what would happen if your child had to become digital and maybe English isn't the language spoken at home. It is a layer of challenge that many of us, unless we're touched by it or dealing with it, don't really think about. So out of challenge comes opportunity. And the opportunity for us is starting with today. So the report that you're going to hear more about is finished, but it really means that all of the work now has to begin. So I just wanted to set the mood, but to set the spirit, I think, to get us in the right frame of mind, I'm honored to introduce a very special guest, and he is our Alachua County Poet Laureate, Stanley Richardson, who is going to share with us a special reading.
Good morning, and thank you for all the work you're doing to make Gainesville a welcoming community. Thank you, Mayor Poe. Thank you, Robin Louis, for inviting me here to share a couple of words with you this morning. And when I say a couple of words, it's a couple of words. Immigrant, Each new dawn, we share the same hogtown sun. But does it warm our distant hearts? We breathe the same ancient, windblown air, share the same feeble globe. Lines of language we probe, possession. But who can own a river, a rock, a neighbor's thirst, a stranger's hunger, the fear of not belonging, the anxiety of entering in? For I am human, and I consider nothing that is human alien to me. I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Thank you.
It's wonderful to have a poet laureate. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so we have another special guest with us today, and that is our Honorable Mayor, who will be reading a proclamation in honor of today's national significance in the work that GINI is doing. Mayor?
Thank you all. It's so nice to be surrounded by so many people I love and care about and respect for this occasion. This is a really big day for the city. We have a lot of challenges. We have a lot of opportunities in our city. But today is about acknowledging our responsibility to make sure that everyone is able and has the resources they need to take full advantage of what our city offers. And this is a journey. Today's about not an end of something, but a beginning of something. Everything that's happened up to this day allows us to understand better how we need to move forward and what we need to do as an organization to be completely inclusive of every one of our neighbors. And so that's an exciting place to be. It also means there's a lot of hard work ahead. And so we have to acknowledge that, and we have to realize that this is going to be a bumpy road sometimes. But with this group around us and all the people that they are able to bring into this process, means that we're going to be successful, and we're going to end up with a much better city once we go through this. So I'm excited about that. I want to acknowledge some of my colleagues. We have Commissioner Sacco and Commissioner Areola joining us today, and I thought our new interim city manager was going to be with us. Cynthia Curry, she's very busy these days as we move through transition. And also want to thank Assistant City Manager Deborah Bowie. She has really been the inspiration and spirit leading this process for the city organization. And it's just been incredible for everybody that's been able to work with her and work on this project. So thank you all. It is my always privilege and honor to present this proclamation on behalf of all of our neighbors in the City of Gainesville. Whereas the mayor of the City of Gainesville has the responsibility to honor and recognize the achievements of all of its neighbors. And whereas Gainesville is home to about 15,000 foreign-born neighbors whose work and contributions to the city have often gone unnoticed and unrecognized. And whereas immigrants in Gainesville have contributed more than $20 million in state and local taxes and represent nearly 10% of all of the spending power in the city. And whereas foreign-born neighbors make up 11.3% of the city's total population, 13.2% of its workforce, and 16% of its business owners. In 2019, the city's foreign-born population also made up nearly a quarter of the community's STEM workforce and close to 10% of frontline essential workers in the food service and healthcare sectors, as well as comprising the majority of agricultural workers who, along with other critical service sector employees, helped keep the city operational during the COVID-19 pandemic. And whereas fear of discrimination or lack of language access prevents many of our foreign-born neighbors from reaching out to critical public services such as law enforcement and other important services. And whereas our foreign-born neighbors have experienced limited recognition and inclusion at public events where they can attend to honor their rich and diverse cultures. And whereas many of our immigrant neighbors encounter barriers such as lack of transportation, lack of language accessibility, identification, financial aid, and legal status, which prevents them from receiving adequate health care and housing. And whereas many of the children of our foreign-born neighbors encounter the same barriers, as well as a lack of access to broadband, which prevents them from receiving equitable educational opportunities. Now, therefore, I, Lauren Poe, by the authority vested in me as the mayor of the City of Gainesville, do hereby proclaim October 28th, 2021 as Gainesville Immigrants Day in the City of Gainesville, and invite all of our citizens to join me in declaring support for reducing the barriers preventing our foreign-born neighbors from truly flourishing by calling on the City of Gainesville to formally recognize their contribution through the creation of events that celebrate their diverse cultures and to increase access to transportation, broadband, identification, language accessibility, and safety for all the city's inhabitants, regardless of origin or legal status. In witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused to be affixed the official seal of the City of Gainesville, Florida, this 7th day of October, 2021. Thank you all for being here, and the real main event is the presentation of the report. And so we're going to next hear from a few folks that were on the GINI committee about their participation, and then Sophia will present the report and the findings. Thank you all very much.
I mentioned earlier that the GINI group has been meeting for over a year in a virtual environment. It's so nice to see people in person. And we have 3 of those wonderful individuals with us. And if I could have them come up, they're going to share some remarks. So Jyoti Parmar, Saeed Khan, and Yeni Molina.
I don't have any prepared remarks. I will share with you one of my 1,000 stories. We came to the US in 1981, and not long after we arrived, actually maybe 2 weeks later, my father died. And so my mother and us 3 children were in a new country trying to navigate everything. Even the air smelled different, the leaves were different, the roads were different, there were washing machines we'd never used. Everything was different. And within a few days after my father's death, the apartment complex that we were in, that we had just moved to, they tried to evict us. Now I'll tell you, my mother was a professor of languages. She taught English at the college level in India. She had a background in economics. And when she went to talk to the office managers at this apartment complex, they shoved her out and told her, go back where you came from, you don't know what you're talking about, and we don't want your kind here. My mother knew this had to be wrong. She knew that there had to be mechanisms for her to access that could help her in this situation. And she did that. But she was able to do it because she knew English, she knew economics, she knew some law, and she was able to, I'm not kidding, she asked the manager at the ShopRite, which is the grocery store, because we literally didn't know anybody in the country. She asked them where we should go. Who should we call? Oh, there's a mayor. What's his name? What's his number? How do I reach out to them? This is somebody with privilege who struggled to get access to some essential services without which we would have been homeless. Trying not to tear up, I don't usually think about this, but this event really, this proclamation is really touching me. As immigrants, we usually do this thing where we hopscotch through life, jump over obstacles, band-aid something, and language access. I just imagine somebody like my mom who did not speak English well or was not as educated, trying to navigate a situation like this. If it happened to us, I know it happens to thousands of people. And language access becomes such an essential thing. If your accent prevents you from being able to reach the services you need, can you imagine not being able to speak the language, which might be your 3rd language, and have people mock you or dismiss you? Gosh, I was not expecting to get emotional. Anyway, so thank you so much for this proclamation, and please, anything anybody needs for helping remove obstacles that will allow. I was 16 at the time, and here I am. I worked for 30 years. I'm donating 40 hours a week of my time in community advocacy. My brother's a lawyer, the other brother's an engineer. We are productive members, and we would not have been. We cannot imagine what our circumstance, what our trajectory would have been had we not gotten the help and been able to access our mayor in Old Bridge, New Jersey, at the time we needed them. So that's my story. I'm going to leave it a slightly more happy note. After this event, maybe a month later, my mother, this was something we used to do, go and order food at McDonald's, and she would invariably, regardless of what we asked her to bring, she would bring back Big Macs. And one day, she came back with McDLTs with extra tomatoes and no cheese, which is what we wanted, which is what she wanted. That day, we celebrated because that was the day she actually stood her ground at the counter and said, no, not Big Mac, I want a McDLT. What? No, not that, a McDLT. She stood there until the woman took the order correctly, and she was able to meet her needs. And this was just about accents, people. So thank you so much for listening to my story. I will pass this on.
Thank you, Jyoti. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Molina. I am part of Madres Sin Fronteras here in Gainesville, also the Vice President of the Human Rights Coalition of Alachua County. It means a lot for me to be able to stand here and thank every single one of you for joining the efforts with community groups in empowering and improving access to resources for immigrants in our community. Most or some of you may have already heard me in the past. I also tend to get very emotional. I love Gainesville. I love this country a lot. It is not a secret that the immigrant community faces challenges every single day. It is not easy to live in fear of discrimination or lack of language access that prevents parents getting involved in schools, calling law enforcement, or getting information on public events for the family. Barriers as lack of transportation, financial aid, identification, and legal status prevents us from receiving proper healthcare, housing, and job opportunities. I want to ask for your help so the community ID can expand and help everyone who believes in an inclusive community. All Alachua residents should have a community ID, regardless of their legal status. Why not? Show some support. We keep saying we're a welcoming city. Let's get to work. Let's do it. We want to keep seeing other cities copy the Human Rights Coalition Community ID program. I don't know if you guys know, but there are several cities that have already took our ID as an example and have started their own path. The community ID has helped me tremendously. I am able to volunteer in school and go as a chaperone for the first time in years. My kid might not be thrilled at having me as a chaperone for school trips, but it gets me so emotional being able to volunteer. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it 3 years ago because I didn't have a state issue ID. So right now, being able to participate in the PTA is awesome. I was already the representative last year for the PTA for his grade. So it's amazing to be able to do that. Something that maybe you guys take for granted, we are just now starting to experience it. 2 years ago, I was also able to get a library card. It was amazing. I didn't have to, just purchase books. I was able to, get them borrowed. Now I can enroll my son in youth programs and camps. I am able to pick him up from school without any more issues. There was a day I was told that my passport was not valid. The lady basically said, no, you need a state issue ID. I was like, no, ma'am, you gotta take my passport. You have to. And I guess she felt kind of entitled, maybe. Back then, it was 3 years ago when we already know what happened with the previous president. So people felt entitled to discriminate and be mean. Not anymore. They take my ID every time I go to school and no questions asked. I also use my ID with a GPD officer, and I felt safe. I was not in fear of being arrested because I couldn't properly identify myself. Actually, I want to thank GPD also for the recent training that you guys went over for the community ID, so that's amazing. We gotta keep up the good work. We also need to bring the sheriff and make him, jump on board. He's the only one missing in the city, in the county. We need the sheriff to accept this ID as valid so we can keep building that trust, that broken trust that we have had for many years. Let's keep working together for a safe community where diverse cultures are celebrated. Thank you so much.
I did write a few things down, but before I go into it, I would really like to suggest that this community ID is extremely important, even for those people who have all the other IDs, because the reason for that is so that just showing that, yes, we consider you as one of us. So they just don't look like, if a policeman looks at the community ID, all of a sudden they will say, oh, maybe it is not a citizen. But if the citizens also have it, that means they cannot discriminate. And I also suggest that we need to talk to our sheriff, because sheriff covers a lot more area than the GPT does. Anyway, after that, well, I'm Saeed Khan. And I have a slightly different story. I am a retired and emeritus professor at UF College of Medicine. According to United Nations, 3.3% of the world's population lives in a country other than their native country of birth. United States has the largest immigrant population. For that matter, we in USA are all immigrants or offspring of immigrants. Immigrants to USA come in many colors, many races, and religions. There are different reasons for immigration. For many, it is religious and political persecution in their homelands. For others, it is economic. One thing is, however, common, and that is that immigrants come to United States to better their lives and better future of their children. I am fortunate. Did not come here because of any sort of persecution. I came here to go to the university on a scholarship to UF in Gainesville, the friendliest town for a foreign student. I was born in British India. I grew up in a multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-religious society. I learned English at an early age. What does that mean is, when I come here, I can speak English. When I look at other people of different religion, doesn't make any difference to me, because where I grew up in India, I lived right next to the Hindus. We didn't have too many Christians, but we did when we went to the school. Now, when I came to UF, university had a fantastic foreign student advisor, Colonel Ferris, and an incredible support system. That's where I think we need to learn things from the university. University has foreign students from every single country in the world, I think. Different languages speaking, different religious backgrounds. How do they manage it? Because as I said, I felt completely at home. The day I came in here, the university was closed. I had $25 in my pocket. I took a taxi, $15 to the taxi driver. I had no idea where to go. I just told them, take me to the foreign student advisor's office. And he did, and he dropped me off. And I'm standing there. What the heck should I do? But then a student came, because that was around Christmas holidays. He came in, he looked at me, he said, are you here? This office will be closed for a few days. Why don't you come with me? I went with him, slept for 2 days. And he was the one who took me to my classes, registration, all that thing. So what I'm saying is, support system that the university provided me, and of course my actual background, that was very helpful, and this city should take advantage and learn things from the University of Florida's International Center. I had little problem adjusting to the United States. As I said, one of my first classes was taught by a Texan. Did not understand most of his lectures. But luckily, everything he taught was available in the notes he supplied. After that, we became good friends. UF was good to me. I even married a UF graduate. She's sitting right there. But many immigrants are not that fortunate. They come here to avoid persecutions and even fear of death. Think about the Syrians, the Afghans, the Somalis, the Congolese, and the other refugees running away from war zones. Think about Puerto Ricans and South Americans, refugees and immigrants. They come here with nothing, to an unknown future, but with the hope that new home will be better for them and their children. Many of them come from non-democratic societies. They face unsurmountable problems. They are not familiar with the language, the customs, the culture, and you just heard what Jyoti was telling. I mean, she and her family spoke English, but it's still things that they had to face. But once they get here, it is our duty as a co-citizens to help them. We have to make them feel at home. As Mayor Poe said in his proclamation, our city and citizens of Gainesville are working to make transition of the immigrants to a productive and easy one. And then, of course, I'm a UF Gator. Thanks. Go Gators, beat the dogs. Thank you.
I want to thank all three of you for sharing the really important part of this work. So before getting to the report, it's really important that we put a face on immigration, right? It's a divisive political discussion, and it shouldn't be, because as you just heard, three very unique experiences from three wonderful people who bring so much to our community. And just think about that multiplying effect. So remember that when you start to hear the highlights of the report, because behind the numbers are real people like the ones you just heard from. So thank you very much for that. So our next presenter has been with this initiative since the beginning. Her name is Sophia Corrigato, and she is a fellow in the Office of the City Manager, and she has the privilege of just hitting some of the highlights in the report, and then of course we do have physical copies for you to take with you, and then they'll be part of our ongoing work when we start to publish the final report. So Sophia, if you would come up, please. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jyoti, Saeed, and Yenny for sharing your stories. I just want to say how grateful I am to have been working on this with Deborah and Robin and all of y'all for the last year. As a Latina, as a daughter of immigrants, this is really, really important work to me. And before we dig in, as I was reminded by another person in this work that, you know, not only do we need to acknowledge the immigrants who maybe are themselves visibly immigrants, but folks who were brought here against their will, who have been forced out of where they were from, folks who were here maybe before the mass wave of colonialization and immigration, just remembering that immigrants all take a different face and shape. So what I'm going to briefly go through with you guys is a 12-page report that's part of the grant process that we were a part of. And this is especially important for highlighting where immigrants in our community do make such an important impact and where they're often not recognized for the impacts that they do make. This is going to cross financial, employment, housing, and demographic data about our immigrant community here in Gainesville. And this gives us the data that we need, that the city needs, the commissioners and mayors, to inform policy decisions, right? We need to know that these immigrants are here, that they deserve to be seen and heard, and that they should absolutely be included in every policy decision moving forward. So to start off, as you'll see in either the first or second page of the report, immigrants in Gainesville paid about $76 million in taxes and held about $242 million in spending power in 2019 alone. While they make up 11.3% of our population, they make up 23% of STEM workers, 17.5% of our education workers, 16% of entrepreneurs and business owners in Gainesville. They paid about $22 million in local and state taxes. About 59.5% of their community, ages 25% and up, have a bachelor's degree or higher. And during COVID, let's remember that immigrants made up well over 10% of our healthcare workforce and kept our community healthy during the pandemic. In 2021, we identified that we have a major need for bilingual and culturally competent public services and healthcare services, which our immigrants in our community are helping us achieve. Between 2019 and 2020 academic year, international students helped support over 2,300 jobs and contribute about $182 million to our community. And in 2019, about 67.8% of immigrant households were renters, and their total accumulated rent paid was about $43.8 million in this community. So kind of transitioning about how immigrants, the magnitude of undocumented immigrants have in our community. They are highly active, with about 84.8% of our 2,700 undocumented immigrants being of working age and contributing their labor to this community. And at the county level, when we're thinking beyond just the city scope, foreign-born residents have contributed about $2.4 billion to the county's GPD, or about 16% of its total just a year or two ago. And overall, when we're reflecting on all this immigrant impact on our workforce in the county, it's important to acknowledge that in 2017 alone, about 69% of hired farm labor in the county were immigrants. So where would we be without their presence and their hard labor? This is why it's extremely important to look at these numbers, acknowledge this data, recognize that immigrants deserve to be seen and heard in this community. They're giving us so much and deserve that same representation, acknowledgement, and appreciation. So thank you guys.
Thank you for that, Sophia. We did mention that the report is the beginning, and it really is. You can mine this report for a lot of data, a lot of really important numbers that jump off the page, but one that I wanted to share because I think it's worth sharing is we saw an increase in our population in our last census count, and 25% of that growth was attributable to immigrants. So the numbers are going up, not backwards, right? So part of that work means making the community welcoming, but also making it safe. And so I'm really honored that we have a wonderful police department and we have great leadership. And here to give some remarks on behalf of GPD is our Chief Inspector, Jamie Kernick.
Good morning, and thank you so much for the invite. The Gainesville Police Department has prided itself on transparency, on building trust, and on community policing. And honestly, I would be remiss if I didn't stand up here and give some thanks out. And the first one is to Ms. Bowie for involving us in this group and giving us the opportunity to learn and grow as a police agency. Part of what we do in our fight and in our efforts within the community is basically to go out and listen to all the citizens. And it doesn't matter your immigration status when we talk about that. It is everyone from everywhere at any time. And it's extremely important for us to be willing to listen and learn. The second thanks is going to have to go out to Miss Veronica Robledo, also Miss Louie, Sophia, everyone that's involved in the GINI group, because we were welcomed and the doors were open to us to listen to stories, to hear how impactful law enforcement is on the community, period, and how we can work to better ourselves and to better serve the community. So with that information, we can either sit idle or we can do some changes and look at how we can progress as a policing agency to build that trust and have that transparency. So if anyone knows anything about Chief Jones, we don't ever sit still. We are consistently changing and evolving. The information that was received, and we were given some policy recommendations and some things that we could add to enhance our police services and also protect individuals who have a question, who may have an immigration status, was to add some language to our police encounters policy. And in that police encounters policy, it basically describes that we will treat all citizens equally, and it involves all of the protected classes. We are honored and privileged to add both immigration status to that, and that is from Ms. Robledo. I'm going to give you 100% of that credit. And also language fluency to 2 of the categories of protected classes that the Gainesville Police Department will not, and let me say will not, be biased or discriminatory against. It is written, it is codified in our policy, and it is something that the police department stands behind. But without getting the information from the community that would make a citizen feel better to say, well, the Gainesville Police Department is very true and is unbiased, we now have it written in our policy that all of us must abide by. And that was a very big change for us, so thank you, Ms. Robledo. And she gave us some excellent examples of that. The second part of a change that we have made recently has been launching and doing a agency-wide community training on the community ID. It is very important that our officers are aware of everything and every ID that is available within the city. And it was something that we started and will continue. So this isn't something that we start and will stop. Realizing that there are many people from many different countries within our community that will call for help. Understand and recognize that our Combined Communications Center has a language line to handle any kind of call for service that comes from someone that does not speak English. And we wanted to make sure and test and make sure we were utilizing it. So we pulled a bunch of data and we looked, and I was very surprised over a very short amount of time. We had over 400 uses of our language line at the 911 center. So it says there are people within the community who are reaching out to get police help, to get fire help, and we have the resources to be able to provide the language translation for them to get the help they need and get through all of that. Some other changes that we've made at our department is translation of forms in several different languages, and we use the census data to find out the 4 most utilized languages within the city. Now, the Gainesville Police Department is constantly striving to do better and to be more transparent, but I will be honest, the welcomingness of the GINI committee and their openness to tell us what we needed to do to improve makes us better as a policing agency. I'm very proud to be a member of the Gainesville Police Department. I'm very proud to be a member of GINI. Thank you for this opportunity to speak today, and thank you for everything that each and every one of you do that advocates within the community to help others. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. It really is a blessing to be in a community where that conversation can be had publicly and be authentic, and I just want to thank GPD publicly for the journey that we have been on. So we've come now to our final presenters, and you've heard a lot in our time with you about language access, so it's fitting that we close with Hannah and Victor from iSpeak, is that the name of the organization, to talk about the importance of language access Florida.
Good morning, and thank you for letting us join you here today. My name is Hannah, and I'm a research assistant with Dr. Laura Gonzalez at Language Access Florida in the UF Department of English, Dr. Victor Del Hierro at the UF Department of English, and Robin Louie with the Rural Women's Health Project. Language access is a civil right, and Gainesville is an increasingly linguistically diverse city. As the city works to be more welcoming of immigrant communities and providing individuals with translation and interpretation in their preferred language is critical and necessary. Currently, we're working with community leaders, activists, and translators in Gainesville and across Central Florida to create a multimedia language access handbook. The purpose of this handbook is to give community members information on how to access language and translation services and communicate across language barriers, and to also provide agencies, businesses, healthcare facilities, and city offices with information about language access. Today, we are launching a language access brochure that helps to communicate language needs between our multilingual community members and various agencies and organizations in the city. Versions of this brochure are printed in English, Spanish, Arabic, Mandarin, and Haitian Creole, and include information on navigating interactions with law enforcement, immigration officials, and medical professionals. We even include in the brochure cards that community members can cut out and keep in their wallet. In situations where you need to communicate with someone across the language barrier, you can simply hand them this card, which is printed in English and your language. Through this project, we hope language justice will become more accessible in our community, as we all have the right to communicate in the language we are most comfortable in. Please take a brochure. We're going to have a ton of them in the back in all of our languages. And please come see us or contact Language Access Florida if you have any questions. Thank you.
So that concludes our prepared remarks, and she doesn't know that I'm going to do this. I don't know why she is sitting in the shadows, but where is Robin Louie? There she is. So Robin Louie has been a partner to me during this process. When we applied for the grant, I needed to identify a community advocate, and I could think of no one more powerful. She is a force to be reckoned with. Robin, wave your hand in the back. Robin has really been the driving force. We started this conversation several years ago, and it was a very different kind of conversation. It was a tough conversation, and I want to thank her publicly for staying the course. Advocates are important to our community because they keep the city accountable. So I am really honored for the opportunity to continue this work. This is not the last time you will hear from us. We will be coming back to you in several months to unveil the final recommendations from the GINI committee. Thank you all very much for being here.